I've got nowhere left to go." She didn't say it to a person. She said it to the dirt, to the empty road, to a God who'd quit answering her months ago. But a man across the street heard it, and instead of dropping a coin in her hand or offering some soft, useless pity, he turned, walked straight into the livery stable, and started saddling a horse for a woman he'd never once spoken to. No questions, no speeches. Just a choice held out in a stranger's rough hand. If you believe some people aren't saved by being rescued, but by finally being given room to breathe, subscribe. Stay with me all the way to the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. The stagecoach left Evelyn Harper standing in the middle of Dry Creek with a bag that weighed less than a sack of flour and a body that felt heavier than a plow. She didn't move for a long moment. She just stood there and let the town look at her. And the town looked. That was the thing about places like this. A stranger stepping down off a coach was the most interesting thing to happen all week, and every eye that could find her did. A woman sweeping a porch stopped sweeping. Two old men on a bench near the general store leaned toward each other and murmured. A boy holding a fishing pole stared at her like she'd fallen out of the sky. Evelyn had learned in the last year exactly what that kind of looking meant. It wasn't cruelty. Cruelty would have been easier to answer. It was appraisal. They were measuring her, the state of her boots, the cut of her dress, the way she held her bag against her chest like it might be stolen. They were deciding what she was before she'd said a single word. She'd been decided about before. She knew how it ended. "Ma'am." The voice belonged to the stage driver already climbing back up to his seat. He was a heavy man, with a sunburned neck, and no patience left in him. "This is the last stop," he said. "You getting off here for good, or you got somewhere else you're headed?" "This is fine," Evelyn said. "Fine." He snorted like the word amused him. "Ain't nobody comes to Dry Creek and calls it fine. You got people here? No. Job? No." The driver shook his head and gathered his reins. "Then I'd say fine is a generous word, ma'am. But it ain't my business." He clicked his tongue, and the horses started, and the coach pulled away in a slow grind of wheels, leaving her alone in a cloud that settled onto her shoulders, like the town had already put a hand on her and pushed down. She stood there. She had $11. She had counted it 4 times on the ride in the dark, holding the coins so they wouldn't clink, and tell the other passengers she had anything worth taking. $11 and a bag with 2 dresses in it, a Bible she didn't read anymore, and a photograph she couldn't look at. That was the whole of her life now. That was everything. Walk, she told herself. Don't stand still. Standing still is how they get a good look at you. Walk like you know where you're going. So she walked. She walked past the general store where the 2 old men on the bench went quiet as she passed and started up again the second she was behind them. She walked past a saloon where a piano was playing something too cheerful for how she felt. She walked past a church with its doors shut in the middle of the day, which somehow felt like the meanest thing she'd seen yet. At the end of the street she found a livery stable and beside it a water trough, and she stopped there because her legs had decided for her that she was done. Evelyn set her bag down. She cupped her hands in the trough and drank, and the water tasted like iron and dust, and it was the best thing she'd had in 2 days. She caught her own reflection in the shaking surface of the water. Hollow eyes. A face that used to be called pretty by people who wanted something. She didn't recognize the woman looking back. That woman had been sure of things once. That woman had believed people when they were kind to her. That woman was gone, and Evelyn didn't miss her because that woman was the reason she was here. She straightened up. She looked down the length of the only street this town had, and she did the arithmetic she'd been doing in every town for 6 months. $11. A room is $1 a night if I'm lucky. Food on top of that. No work, no people. No name here that means anything good. 4 days. Maybe 5 if I don't eat much. And then what? She had no answer for, and then what? She'd run out of answers a long stretch of road back. She'd been living on momentum, on the simple animal need to be somewhere that wasn't where she'd been, and now the momentum had run out too, and she was standing at a water trough at the edge of a nothing town in the middle of a country too big to hide in and too small to disappear in. The words came up out of her before she could stop them. Quiet. Not meant for anyone. I've got nowhere left to go. She heard how it sounded the second it left her. Like a prayer, like a surrender. She hated that it was true, and she hated more that she'd said it out loud, because saying a thing made it real, and this was one thing she'd wanted to keep from being real. She didn't know that across the street, in the shade of the mercantile awning, a man had heard her. Liam Carter had come into Dry Creek for 4 things: nails, coffee, a length of chain, and a part for a busted pump. He'd already gotten the nails and the coffee. He was standing outside the mercantile counting the chain when the stagecoach came in, and like everybody else, he'd watched the woman step down. Unlike everybody else, he'd stopped watching pretty quick. Liam had 32 years behind him, and most of them spent reading things, reading weather, reading horses, reading men, before they made trouble. He'd learned that you could tell more about a person in the first 10 seconds than in the next 10 years, if you were paying attention, and Liam was always paying attention. It was the whole of him, really. He didn't talk much, he watched. And what he saw when he looked at the woman by the trough wasn't what the 2 old men on the bench saw. They saw a stranger to gossip about. He saw somebody at the end of a rope. He knew the look. He'd worn it once himself a long time back in a season of his life he didn't discuss with anybody. The look of a person who'd been doing the sums in their head and kept coming up short. The look of somebody counting days like a prisoner counts them. He was going to leave it alone. That was his intention. A man had no call to insert himself into a stranger's troubles, and God knew he had a ranch full of his own. He turned to go finish his errands. Then the wind carried her voice across the street. I've got nowhere left to go. Liam stopped. He didn't turn around right away. He stood with the chain in his hands, and he felt those words go into him and land somewhere he thought he'd sealed off years ago. He knew a lot of things about the world, and one of them was this. People said all kinds of things they didn't mean. They said they were fine when they weren't. They said they'd be all right when they wouldn't. But every so often somebody said a thing that was so plainly true that it stripped all the noise off it, and you could tell the difference the way you could tell the difference between thunder and a slamming door. That was true. What she'd said was true. She wasn't performing it. She'd said it to herself, believing no one was listening. Liam set the chain down on the mercantile's step, careful like it mattered where it went. The storekeeper stuck his head out. You want that chain or not, Carter? I'll be back for it, Liam said. Well, it ain't going anywhere. No, Liam agreed. It ain't. And then he walked. Not toward her. That was the thing that would have told the whole town wrong. He didn't walk toward the woman at the trough. He walked into the livery stable, and he didn't say a word to anybody because he hadn't decided yet what he was going to say. And Liam Carter had a lifelong policy of not opening his mouth until he knew what should come out of it. Inside the stable, the liveryman looked up from a stall he was mucking. Carter, you need Ash. No, he's tied out front. Liam looked down the row of horses. That bay mare, the gentle one. She for sale or just for hire? The bay. The liveryman leaned on his pitchfork. She's for sale if the price is right. Why, you know I don't got a horse alive that's calmer'n her. She'd carry a sleeping baby down a mountain and not wake it. You short a mount. How much? For the mare. Now hold on. What's this about all sudden? How much, Dell? The liveryman named a price. It was a fair one. Liam knew horses, and he knew what they were worth, and Dell wasn't the kind to cheat a man he saw every month. Liam counted the money out of the roll in his pocket, the roll he'd brought to town for a pump part and some chain, and he handed it over, and Dell took it with a look of pure bafflement on his face. You want a saddle on her? Yeah, and check the girth twice. And fill a set of saddlebags, whatever dried goods you got, some jerky hardtack, whatever'll keep, and a canteen, full. Carter, Dell said slowly. You fixing to send somebody somewhere? Liam didn't answer that. He picked up a blanket off the rail and laid it over the mare's back himself, smoothing it flat with the flat of his hand. The way you would if you cared whether the horse was comfortable, and the way you would if you were buying yourself a minute to think. Because here was the truth. Liam wasn't saying out loud he did not know this woman. He didn't know her name, her trouble, or whether she was worth a dime of the money he'd just spent. She could be a thief. She could be a liar. She could be 100 kinds of trouble he'd regret till his dying day. But he'd heard what he'd heard. And a man who could hear a thing like that and just walk on to buy his chain, Liam didn't want to be that man. He'd been raised by a mother who'd have skinned him for it, and though she'd been dead 19 years, he still lived like she might come back and check his work. He saddled the mare. He checked the girth twice like he'd said. He checked the reins. Then he checked them again, and Dell watched him do it and didn't say anything, because there was something in Liam's face that Dell had never seen there before, and he knew enough to keep his mouth shut around it. Then Liam led the bay mare out into the light, and he walked her across the street toward the water trough and toward the woman who'd said she had nowhere left to go. Evelyn heard the horse before she saw the man. She turned, and there he was, tall, unhurried, leading a saddled bay mare by a loose rein. He had a face like weather-worn wood, all planes and lines and eyes that didn't dart around the way most men's eyes did when they came up on a woman alone. He looked at her straight, but not the way the old men on the bench had looked at her, not measuring, just seeing. Every muscle in Evelyn's body went tight. She'd learned this too. A man walking a horse up to a woman with nowhere to go was a man with an angle. She'd been surviving off her wits for a year, and her wits told her plain as a bell. This is a transaction. He wants something. They always want something. Figure out what, before he says it, so you can decide how much of a lie to tell him. "Ma'am," the man said, and stopped a good 10 feet off, farther than he needed to. Far enough that she could have run if she'd wanted to. "I don't have any money," Evelyn said. It came out flat and hard, and she meant it to. "If you're selling something, you've got the wrong person." "I'm not selling anything." "Then what do you want?" The man considered that. He seemed to consider everything this one-like words cost him money, and he wasn't going to spend them carelessly. "You said you had nowhere to go," he said. The blood drained out of Evelyn's face, and then came roaring back into it hot. He'd heard her. Some stranger had heard her lowest, most private moment, the one she'd let out only because she'd believed she was alone, and now he was standing here holding it. "I don't know what you think you heard," she said. "I heard what you said." "You heard wrong. Maybe." He didn't argue it. He just held the mare's rein and let the silence sit there, and the silence was somehow worse than if he'd pushed. "But if I heard right, this horse is bought and paid for. There's food in the bags and water in the canteen. I've got a ranch a half-day's ride from here. There's work on it that needs doing, and a roof over a bunkhouse and a kitchen that's been without a decent cook since my last one married a cattle buyer and moved to Cheyenne." He paused. "You don't have to take it. You don't have to say a word to me on the road. But you don't need to stay in a place where you're not wanted. And I've got somewhere you could go." Evelyn stared at him. Her whole body was screaming at her. This is the oldest trick there is. This is exactly how it starts. A kind man, a soft offer, a way out of the corner you're backed into. And you take it because you're desperate, and desperation makes you stupid, and once you're miles from anywhere with no money and no way back, then he tells you what it really costs. She'd learned that lesson from a master. She had the scars on her spirit to prove it. "Why?" she said. The word came out of her like an accusation. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "No. So why?" And here the man did something she didn't expect. He didn't flatter her. He didn't tell her she looked like she needed saving, or that a woman like her deserved better, or any of the pretty poison she'd been fed before. He just said, "Because I heard somebody say they had nowhere left to go, and I found out I couldn't walk off and leave it." Then he added quieter, "That's the whole of it. There's no more to it than that. You can believe me or not." Evelyn's jaw worked. She wanted to believe him. That was the trap. Wanting to believe was how they got you. "And if I get to your ranch," she said, "and it turns out there's more to it than that." The man's eyes didn't waver. "Then you take that mare and you ride off, and I don't chase you. She's yours either way. I already paid for her. You could take her right now and never come to the ranch at all, and I'd have no way to stop you and no mind to try." He held the rein out toward her. "She's yours," he said. "That's not a payment for anything. It's not a hook. It's just a horse. What you do with her is your business." And he let go of the rein. He didn't hand it to her. He didn't press it into her palm and close her fingers over it the way a man does when he wants to make you feel obligated. He just dropped the loose end of the rein so it hung down, and the mare stood there patient, tied to no one. And the choice hung in the air between them like a held breath. Evelyn looked at the horse. Then she looked at the man. "What's your name?" she said. Not a question, a demand. "Liam Carter." "And this ranch, it has a name, Red Hollow. And there's other people there, not just you. 6 ranch hands, a cook well. There was a cook." The corner of his mouth moved not quite a smile. "There's the cook's old room off the kitchen. Has a lock on the inside of the door. I'll have Dell throw in a spare key before we leave so you know the lock works, and I don't have one to it." Evelyn's throat tightened. He'd thought of that. Of all the things a frightened woman would need to hear, he'd thought of the lock and the key, and he'd said it plain before she'd had to ask, in a voice that carried no offense at all. As if, of course, she'd want the door to lock from the inside, as if that was the most natural thing in the world, and no insult to him whatsoever. Nobody had done that. In a year of nobody, that was the first thing anybody had done that made her feel for 1/2 of 1 second like a person instead of a problem. She hated how much it worked on her. She was suspicious of exactly how much it worked on her. "I don't trust you," she said. "You shouldn't," Liam said. "You don't know me. Trusting people you don't know is how folks get hurt. I'd think less of your sense if you did." That more than anything was what decided her, because a man running a con needed her to trust him. That was the whole engine of it. A con man's first job, his only job, was to get her to lower her guard. And here was a man telling her plainly, almost gruffly, not to. It wasn't proof. She knew it wasn't proof. A clever enough wolf could learn to say, "Don't trust me," because he knew it disarmed you better than trust me ever could. She knew that. She'd met that wolf. But she was out of days. That was the plain truth of it. $11 in 4 days, and then nothing. And this, a horse of her own, a road out, a door that locked. This was more than she'd had in front of her since she'd left the East. And if it was a trap, at least, it was a trap with a horse in it, and she'd have that horse under her, and horses could run. "All right," Evelyn said. She stepped forward and picked up the rein. The mare turned her big, soft head and looked at her, and Evelyn put her hand on the animal's neck, and something in her chest cracked a little at the simple warmth of it, at the plain, uncomplicated life of a creature that wanted nothing from her but a steady hand. "All right," she said again, softer. "But I've got a knife, and I know how to use it, so don't make me sorry." "I don't doubt it," Liam said. "Get your bag. I've got to fetch my chain." They rode out of Dry Creek with the sun past its high point, and the 2 old men on the bench watched them go, and one of them said something to the other, and Evelyn didn't hear it and didn't want to. Liam rode a big gray gelding he called Ash, and he set an easy pace, and he kept a horse length between them and a little ahead, so that she was never behind him where she couldn't see him, and never crowded up beside him where she'd feel penned. She noticed it. She noticed everything. It was possible he did it on purpose to make her comfortable, which meant he understood exactly what would make her comfortable, which was its own kind of alarming. She rode with the reins in her left hand, and her right hand free near where the knife was, and she watched the country open up around them, and she said nothing. He'd told the truth about that too. He didn't push her to speak. He rode, and the horse's hooves made their steady sound, and the miles went by, and Liam Carter said not one word for the better part of an hour. It unnerved her more than talk would have. She was braced for talk. She knew how to handle a man who talked. You fed him a little, you laughed when you had to, you steered him. But a man who just rode along in silence, content asking nothing, she didn't know what to do with the space he left her. Finally, Because the silence had gotten too big, she broke it herself. Why didn't your cook leave sooner if she got married? Married 2 months back. Stayed on till she found me a girl to take over. Girl lasted a week. Liam's eyes stayed on the trail. Couldn't cook. Cried a lot. Missed her mother. I sent her home. You sent her home. Paid her the month and put her on the stage. Wasn't right for her out there. Some folks aren't made for it. No shame in it. He glanced over. You made for it. I don't know what I'm made for anymore, Evelyn said before she could think better of the honesty. Liam nodded like that was a reasonable thing for a person to say and didn't push on it. They rode. That businessman asked about you, Liam said a while later. Evelyn's whole body went cold. What? There was a man in Dry Creek yesterday, Liam said, still easy, still watching the trail like he was remarking on the weather. Come in on the morning coach, well-dressed, city clothes. He was in the mercantile when I came for my order asking the storekeeper about a woman. Young, brown hair, traveling alone. Said he was looking for a relation of his that had, quote, wandered off and wasn't in her right mind. The reins went slick in Evelyn's hand. I told myself it was nothing, Liam went on. Lots of women travel. Lots of men look for relations. Wasn't my business. He turned his head and looked at her fully now, and there was nothing lazy in his eyes anymore. Then a woman got off the stage today looking like she'd walked out of a fire. Young, brown hair, traveling alone. Evelyn had stopped breathing. Victor was here. Victor had been here. Not chasing her from 3 states back the way she'd let herself believe, not a rumor, 100 miles behind her. He'd been in Dry Creek yesterday. He'd stood in that mercantile and told his story, the story he told everybody, the story that had already worked on a dozen towns and 100 people. She's not in her right mind. She wandered off. Poor thing. If you see her, hold her for me. There'll be a reward. He had gotten there before she did. So, Liam said, and his voice had gone very quiet and very even, the voice of a man laying his cards on the table one at a time. I'm going to ask you one thing, and then I'm not going to ask you anything else the whole rest of the ride, and you can answer it or not. But I'd like the truth, because I don't much care for being lied to, and I already spent good money on a horse for you. Evelyn's hand had drifted to the knife. She didn't decide to do it. It just went there. Is that man, Liam said, somebody who's got a right to be looking for you, a husband, a father, somebody the law would side with? And Evelyn, who had lied to every stranger for a year, who had lies stacked up in her, ready to deploy like cordwood, who could have spun this man a story so clean and sad he'd have believed every word opened her mouth to lie. And couldn't. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the lock on the door he'd offered before she asked. Maybe it was the way he'd dropped the rein instead of pressing it into her hand. Maybe she was just so tired, so bone-deep, hollowed-out tired, that the lie wouldn't come the way sometimes your legs just won't run anymore, no matter how loud the fear is screaming. No, she said. He's got no right to me. He never did. Whatever the law says. But the law might say he does. The law's easy to lie to, Evelyn said, if you've got money and a good coat and a story people want to believe. And he's got all 3. Liam was quiet for a long moment. Evelyn's heart was slamming so hard, she thought he must be able to hear it over the horses. This was the moment. This was where a lesser man, where nearly every man, would do the arithmetic she'd just watched cross his face. A woman with a rich man hunting her. A woman the law might hand over. A reward, maybe. Trouble, certainly. A smart man cut a woman like that loose. A smart man rode her back to town and collected whatever there was to collect and washed his hands. She sat rigid in the saddle hand on the knife, and she waited to find out what kind of man Liam Carter was. All right, Liam said. That was all. All right. He faced forward again and clicked his tongue at Ash and picked the pace up a hair. What? Evelyn's voice cracked. That's it. All right. You told me the truth. I asked for the truth, and you gave it to me even though a lie would have been safer for you. That tells me more about you than any story would have. He didn't look at her. There's a fork up ahead. Left goes on to Red Hollow. Right cuts north, hits the rail line at Bitter Springs by nightfall. You could be on a train and gone before that man in the coat ever figures out which way you went. I'll ride you to the fork either way. Your choice same as it was at the trough." Evelyn stared at the sight of his face and could not for the life of her find the trick in it. "You'd let me go," she said. "You spent money on that horse, and you'd just let me ride off north and never see it again. It's your horse. Nobody does that." "Then I guess you've been keeping poor company," Liam said. And that of everything was the thing that finally broke something loose in Evelyn Harper. Not the horse, not the food, not the offer of a roof. It was that one flat, unromantic sentence delivered without any softness at all. "Then I guess you've been keeping poor company." Because it was true. She had been keeping poor company. She'd been keeping the worst company a woman could keep, and she'd been keeping it for so long that a man treating her like an ordinary person, no more no less, hit her harder than any kindness could have. Her eyes stung. She looked away fast out at the empty land and blinked until it passed, because she'd sworn a long time ago she would not cry in front of another man as long as she lived. They came to the fork. Liam reined up. He didn't say anything. He just stopped, and Ash stood, and the bay mare stopped beside him, and the two trails split away in front of them right toward the rail line, and a train and a running that had no end. Left toward a ranch and a stranger and a door that locked from the inside. Evelyn looked at the right-hand trail for a long time. It was the smart choice. Keep running. Never stop. That was how she'd stayed alive. But she was so tired. She was so tired of running that the word tired didn't reach it anymore. She'd been running so long she'd forgotten what it was she was even running toward. She only knew what she was running from, and a person can't run from something forever. Eventually, you have to run at something instead, or you just run out. "Why do you keep giving me the choice?" she asked. Back at the trough. Now. "Why do you keep leaving it up to me?" And Liam Carter, who had said maybe 200 words in the whole half-day, looked at her and gave her the truest thing he had. Because somewhere along the line, he said, "Somebody took every choice you had off you. I can see it on you plain as a brand. I don't know who or how, and it's not my business unless you make it my business. But a person who's had their choices taken." He stopped. Started again rougher. "The only thing I know to give a person like that is choices, as many as I've got, and let them find out they can still make one. That's all. I'm not a preacher, and I'm not a hero, and I don't want anything off you. I just don't have it in me to take another choice away from somebody who's already had them all taken." The silence after that was enormous. Evelyn realized she was crying. She'd sworn she wouldn't, and she was quiet without sound, the tears just running down and dropping off her jaw, and she didn't wipe them because wiping them would have been admitting they were there. Liam did her the mercy of looking away out at the horizon, giving her the privacy of it. "Left," she said. Her voice was wrecked. "I'll take the left." Liam nodded slowly. He didn't smile, didn't say good choice, or you won't regret it, or any of the things a lesser man would have said to make it about himself. He just said, "Then let's get on. There's stew needs making, and 6 hungry men who've been eating my cooking for a week, and I promise you, ma'am, that is its own kind of tragedy." And Evelyn Harper laughed. It came up out of her from someplace she'd thought was dead. A real laugh, cracked and wet, and surprised the first one in longer than she could count, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth like she could put it back, and she couldn't, and Liam pretended not to notice that either, which was its own small mercy. They turned their horses left toward Red Hollow, but even as the mare carried her down the trail toward the first thing that had felt like hope in a year, a cold voice was speaking underneath Evelyn's ribs, patient and certain, the voice that had kept her alive. "He was in Dry Creek yesterday. He got there before you did. He always gets there first. And this town, this ranch, this quiet man Victor already knows how to take them from you. He's done it before. He'll do it again. You've just told a stranger everything, and the only question left is how long you've got before the man in the coat comes riding up that road with a story the whole world would rather believe than yours." Evelyn rode toward the ranch with her back straight and her eyes dry, and her hand out of a habit she couldn't break, resting light and ready on the handle of the knife. She had chosen the left-hand road. She had no idea it was already too late to matter. Red Hollow came up out of the land the way a decision does all at once. And then there it was, and there was no unmaking it. Evelyn saw the ranch house first low and long, and then the bunkhouse and the barn and the corrals and men. She counted them without meaning to. An old habit. Always know how many 5 men that she could see, and a 6th coming out of the barn, wiping his hands. They stopped what they were doing when they saw the 2 riders come down the slope. They stopped and they looked, and Evelyn felt the old cold thing tighten in her chest, because she knew that look she'd been getting that look for a year. The look that measured a strange woman and decided what she was. "They're staring," she said low. "They're curious," Liam said. "It's different. Curious wears off. You'll see. And if it doesn't, then I'll have a word with whoever it is and it'll wear off directly." He said it flat, not a threat exactly, just a statement of how things ran here, and Evelyn filed it away with all the other things she was filing away about Liam Carter, in a ledger she kept 2 columns wide. Things that could be true, and things that could be traps, dressed up like truth. They rode into the yard, and Liam swung down off Ash easy like a man who'd done it 50,000 times. And he didn't come around to help Evelyn down, which she noticed and was grateful for, because a man who reaches up to lift a woman off a horse is a man putting his hands on her, whether she asked or not. He let her get herself down. She got herself down. The oldest of the men came forward. He had gray in his mustache and a limp he was trying not to show, and eyes that didn't miss much. "Carter," he said, "you went for a pump part." "Didn't get the pump part." "I can see that." The old man's eyes went to Evelyn, to the bay mare, back to Liam. "Got something else. This is Miss Harper. She's going to cook for us if the food she makes is any better than what you boys have been choking down all week, which it'd about have to be." Liam handed Ash's reins to a younger hand who'd come up. "Miss Harper, this is Amos. He's been here longer than I have, and he thinks that means he runs the place. Every so often, I let him believe it." Amos didn't smile, but something in the leather of his face eased a 1/4 inch. "Ma'am?" He looked at her a beat longer than was comfortable, and then he said, not unkindly, "You look wore out." "I am," Evelyn said. "Well," Amos nodded once like she'd passed some small test by not pretending otherwise. "Kitchen's through the side door. Stove draws a little on the left. Wood stacked out back. Ain't nobody touched that kitchen but to burn things in it since Sarah left, so I'll apologize for the state of it now and save us both time." And that was it. That was the whole of Evelyn's welcome to Red Hollow, an old man apologizing for a dirty stove. No speeches, no suspicion she could put a hand on, no leering from the younger ones who'd already gone back to their work, now that the curiosity Liam promised was wearing off exactly like he'd said it would. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the trap tighten, because a place this easy, this decent, was worth more to lose than a place that treated her hard, and Victor knew that too. Victor always went after the things you couldn't stand to lose. That was the whole of his art. She went to the kitchen. Amos had undersold it. It was worse than he'd said. But Evelyn stood in the middle of it and looked at the cold stove and the dirty pots and the disorder of a room that 6 men had been raiding and ruining for 2 months, and something in her settled that hadn't settled in a year. Because a mess was a thing she could fix. A mess had rules. You cleaned this, then that, then the other, and at the end of it there was order where there'd been chaos, and no one could take that from you or lie you out of it. A clean kitchen was true, in a way people never were. She rolled up her sleeves. By the time the light started going, she'd hauled water and scrubbed the stove and scoured the pots and found the flour which had weevils and sifted them out and found the salt pork and the beans and the last of somebody's onions going soft in a crate. She built a fire that drew right even with the bad draw on the left because she'd cooked on worse. And she made a stew, a real one, thick seasoned with what little there was, and biscuits to go with it. And she rang the triangle by the door, the way she'd seen it hanging there waiting to be rung. The men came in slow and suspicious, the way men do when they've been burned by bad food for weeks. The young one, his name was Tom, she'd learned, took one bite and stopped chewing and stared at the bowl like it had insulted him. "What's the matter?" Amos said. Too good. I forgot, Tom said with his mouth full. I forgot food was supposed to taste like this. And the men laughed, and one of them said something, and another said something back. And just like that, the kitchen was full of noise and warmth, and men eating like men who'd been hungry longer than a week. And Evelyn stood at the stove with her hands raw from scrubbing, and watched 6 strangers eat what she'd made. And she thought, this is the trap, right here. This is the exact thing he'll use. He'll take this, and he'll turn it into proof of something. He always does. But she couldn't help it. Some starved thing in her fed on the sight of them eating. Liam came in last after the others, and he took a bowl and sat at the end of the long table. And he ate without a word the way he did everything. But when he was done, he set his spoon down and looked down the length of the table at her. And he said plain in front of all of them, "That's the best meal that's been made in this house in a year, maybe longer." He stood. "You boys tell her thank you, or you can cook for your own selves tomorrow." A rough chorus of thanks went up. Tom said it twice. And Evelyn, who had braced her whole self against pity and against charm and against every soft trap she could name, found she had no defense at all against being simply publicly credited, against a man standing up in front of his men and giving her the plain due of her work, no more and no less, in a voice that dared anybody to say otherwise. She had to turn to the stove so they wouldn't see her face. That was the first night. The days that came after fell into a shape, and the shape was so good it frightened her. She cooked, she cleaned, she put the household back in order, the way she'd put the kitchen back in order. She found where the linens went and washed the ones that had been let go. She got the pantry inventoried and locked, and the key on a string around her own neck, which Amos noticed and approved of with a grunt. She learned the men. Tom was young and homesick and ate like he was hollow. The 2 Swede brothers, Niels and Per, barely spoke English and communicated with her entirely, in nods and empty plates, held out for more. A wiry hand named Cooper, who'd been in some trouble somewhere, and didn't talk about it, and didn't have to, because nobody at Red Hollow made a man account for his past, which she noticed, and which meant more to her than any of them could know. And Amos, who ran the place under Liam and had decided somewhere in that first week that Evelyn Harper was all right, and once Amos decided a thing, the rest generally fell in line. And Liam. Liam, who left her be. Who came in at meals and ate and gave her credit and left. Who never once came into the kitchen when she was alone in it, and never once stood in a doorway to block it, and never once let his eyes do the thing men's eyes did. Who ran his ranch and kept his distance, and gave her every single day exactly what he'd promised at the water trough, a roof work and the space to be a person. It should have healed her. Instead, it wound her tighter, because every good day was one more day Victor could take, and she knew with the certainty of a woman who'd learned it in blood that he was coming. He'd been in Dry Creek. He didn't give up. He never gave up. That was the thing about Victor Hale that nobody believed, until it was too late. He was patient the way a disease is patient. He didn't chase. He arrived. She started sleeping badly. She'd locked the door. The lock worked. She'd checked it the first night and every night since, and she'd lie awake listening for hooves in the yard. One night, about 2 weeks in, she couldn't stand the lying awake, and she got up and went to the kitchen to bank the fire. And she found Liam sitting at the long table in the dark with a cup of coffee gone cold in front of him. She stopped in the doorway. Her hand went to her chest. "Couldn't sleep," Liam said. He didn't turn around. "Figured somebody else couldn't either. I heard you get up most nights." Evelyn's whole body went rigid. "You listen for me." "No," Liam said. "But the floor between your room and the kitchen is old and it talks. I hear you go by. I don't get up." He turned his head just enough. "I'm not up now because of you. I'm up because I've got a fence line down on the North 40, and a cattle buyer coming Thursday, and not enough hands to fix the first before the second. And it's the kind of problem that keeps a man at a table in the dark. Sit down if you want. Or don't. There's coffee, but it's cold, and I'm too lazy to make more." She almost left. Then she thought, if I leave, I'm still afraid. If I sit, maybe I find out one more thing about what kind of man he is. And she was so tired of being afraid that she sat at the far end of the table with the whole long length of it between them. They sat in the dark for a while. "Why'd you really do it?" Evelyn said finally. "The horse. You never gave me a reason. That was the whole reason. I've been trying to figure it 2 weeks. A man doesn't spend that kind of money on a stranger for nothing." Liam was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "There was a woman," he said, "a long time back. Before I had this place. She was—" He stopped and started again the way he did, backing up to find truer footing. "She was my sister, younger than me, and she got herself tangled up with a man who was no good, the kind that's charming to everybody, but the one who's got to live with him. And she came to me once. Came to the place I was working, and she stood in the yard, and she had a look on her." He turned his cup a slow quarter turn on the table. "And I was busy. And I was young. And I thought I knew what mattered. And I told her to come back after roundup and we'd sort it out. Told her I couldn't leave right then. Told her I don't even remember what I told her. Some reason. Some good reason." Evelyn had gone very still. "She didn't come back after roundup," Liam said. "She went back to him instead because she had nowhere else to go on account of the one place she should have been able to go told her to come back later." He looked at his coffee. "I got a letter 4 months on, from a stranger, telling me where she was buried." The kitchen was so quiet Evelyn could hear the fire tick. "So when I heard a woman by a trough say she had nowhere left to go," Liam said, "and I felt myself about to walk on and finish buying my chain, I heard it in her voice. The exact thing I didn't hear in my sister's, on account of I wasn't listening. And I thought I have got exactly one chance in this life to not be the man who walked on. And it's standing across the street. And if I let it go, I don't get another." He finally looked at her full in the dark. "That's the whole reason, Miss Harper. It's not about you if you want the truth. It never was. I'd have done it for anybody who said it like you said it. You just happened to be the one standing there. I hope that's not an insult. I mean it as the opposite." And Evelyn, who had spent 2 weeks certain there was a trick in this man, certain the kindness had a hook in it somewhere she just hadn't found yet, sat in the dark and understood that she'd found the hook. And the hook was grief. And it was the truest thing a person had said to her in years. And there was no trap in it at all because he wasn't trying to save her. He was trying not to be the man who hadn't saved somebody else. That wasn't about her. That was between him and a grave in some other state. For the first time, she believed him all the way down. And it terrified her more than any lie could have because now she had something real to lose. "I'm going to tell you something," Evelyn said. "And then I'm going to bed, and you're not going to ask me anything about it tonight. Can you do that?" "Yes." "The man who's looking for me. The one in the coat." Her voice was very level and very quiet. "He's not my kin, and he's not my husband, whatever he tells people. He's a man I worked for, and he's going to come here, not maybe. He's going to come, because that's what he does. He doesn't let a thing go once it's his, and he decided a long time ago that I was his, and me leaving didn't change his mind about it. It just made him patient." She stood up from the table. "So when he comes, and he will, I want you to know 2 things ahead of time. The first is that everything he says about me will sound reasonable, and half of it will even be true twisted just enough. And the second," she stopped at the door, "the second is that whatever he offers you to hand me over, and he'll offer you something, money, or a story, or a favor. He always finds the thing a man wants, it'll be worth more than I am. On paper, it'll always look like the smart choice to give me up. He builds it that way. He makes doing right cost you something, and doing wrong pay you, and then he sits back and watches which kind of man you are." She looked at him. "I've watched good men fail that test, more than one. So I'm not asking you to pass it. I'm just telling you it's coming, so you can decide now when it's cheap, instead of later when it isn't." And she went to bed and left him sitting there in the dark with his cold coffee and everything she'd just laid on the table. The next morning she came out braced for it to be different, for him to look at her the way men looked at a woman who was trouble now that she'd named the trouble out loud. But Liam just said, "There's a buyer coming Thursday. I'll need the good dishes and enough dinner for 2 extra. Can you do a proper meal? The kind that makes a man feel like he's dealing with folks who've got their affairs in order. Yes, Evelyn said. Then that's what I need. Thank you. And he went out to fix his fence, and that was all. And Evelyn understood that his answer to everything she'd confessed was to keep treating her exactly as he had before, which was the only answer that could have reached her, and he'd somehow known it. Thursday came. The cattle buyer arrived at midday, and he brought a partner, and Evelyn laid out a meal that made both men go quiet and appreciative, and the deal Liam had been worrying at got made over her biscuits. And afterward, the buyer shook Liam's hand and said, "You've done well for yourself out here, Carter. Good land, good stock, and a cook like that, a man could envy you." And Liam said, "The cook's the best part, and I know it." And Evelyn, clearing plates, kept her face still and her hands steady, and did not let anyone see what those words did to her. The buyers left in the late afternoon, riding back toward town, satisfied. And an hour behind them, coming up the same road, riding a hired horse and wearing a coat too fine for the country, came a man Evelyn didn't have to see to know. She was at the kitchen window when the rider crested the slope. She had a plate in her hand. She saw the coat first, the good gray coat, and then the way he sat a horse upright, easy like a man arriving somewhere that already belonged to him. And the plate slid out of her fingers and broke on the floor, and she didn't hear it break. "He got here before you." The cold voice right on schedule. "He always gets here first. He was probably in Dry Creek the whole time. He probably watched you ride out. He probably followed the buyer's dust straight to the door." Amos came in at the sound of the plate. "You all right? You've gone the color of—" He followed her eyes to the window. "Who's that then? We ain't expecting nobody." "Get Liam," Evelyn said. Her voice didn't sound like her own. "Get him now. And Amos." She caught his sleeve. "Whatever that man says, whatever he says, he's a liar. He's the best liar you'll ever meet. Don't let it work on you before Liam gets here." Amos looked at her hard 1 second, and whatever he saw made him move fast for a man with a bad hip. By the time Victor Hale reined up in the yard, the men had drifted in from their work. That instinct working animals have, that something's wrong instinct, and they stood loose and watchful around the edges of the yard, and Amos had gone to fetch Liam from the North 40, and Evelyn made herself walk out of the kitchen and stand on the porch because she was done running. And if she was going to make a stand, it would not be from behind a door. Victor swung down off the hired horse. He was handsome, the way a knife is handsome. He was 50 and looked 40, and he had a smile that had opened 1,000 doors, and he turned it on the assembled ranch hands like a lamp. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," he said. "Warm, easy a man among men. Forgive the intrusion. I've had a long ride." His eyes found Evelyn on the porch, and the smile changed, softened, filled with something that looked exactly like relief and love and worry, and Evelyn's stomach turned over, because she knew how good it looked. She knew it looked real. That was the whole horror of him. "Evelyn," he said, and his voice cracked, actually cracked on her name. "Oh, thank God. Thank God. I've been out of my mind." "Don't," Evelyn said. "I've been looking for 3 months." He took a step toward the porch, and the men shifted, and he stopped. A reasonable man respecting other men's ground. "Do you know what it's been like? Not knowing if you were alive, if you were hurt. You vanished. Evelyn, you left in the night. You didn't leave a word. I left because I know why you left." He said it gently, so gently, and turned to the men as he said it, bringing them in, and Evelyn watched him do the thing he did, the thing she'd told Liam about, watched him build it right in front of her. "She's not well, gentlemen. I want to be honest with you because you've clearly shown her a kindness, and you deserve honesty in return. My name is Victor Hale. Evelyn was in my employ and under my family's care back in Ohio. Her nerves have never been strong. She has spells. She gets ideas about people, about being watched, about being controlled. Ideas that aren't. That don't have any root in what's real. And when she's in one of these spells, she runs. She's run before. We always find her and we always bring her home. And we care for her, because that's what you do for someone who's ill, even when the illness makes them frightened of the very people trying to help. It was masterful. Evelyn had heard it before, and it still made her breath come short with how good it was, because every piece of it took something true. She had left in the night. She did believe she was being watched and controlled. She had run before and set it in a frame that turned every true thing into a symptom. She saw it land on the men. She saw Tom's young face fill with doubt. She saw even Cooper, who trusted nobody, tilt his head like a man reconsidering. Because the man in the coat was calm and grieved and reasonable, and the woman on the porch was rigid and wild-eyed. And had they all knew come here 2 weeks ago, looking like she'd walked out of a fire with a story nobody had asked to hear. "It's not true," Evelyn said. And even to her own ears, it sounded like exactly what a person having a spell would say. "None of it's true." "I have papers," Victor said gently to the men, not to her, reaching into his fine coat. "A physician's letter. Documentation of her condition. I don't say this to shame her. God knows I don't. I say it so that you understand I'm not some stranger making claims. I'm a man who's spent a great deal of money and 3 sleepless months trying to bring a sick woman home before she comes to harm." He drew out a folded paper and held it up, and it had a seal on it, a real seal, and Evelyn knew he'd paid a doctor for it, the way he paid for everything, and she watched the seal do its work on the men's faces, that seal worth more than her word, worth more than 2 weeks of good meals, worth more than anything she'd built here, because she'd built it with her hands, and he'd bought his with money. And in this world, a paper with a seal beat a woman with raw knuckles every single time. "Now," Victor said, folding the paper away, sorrowful and reasonable and winning. "I don't want any trouble. I'll pay for her keep. You've fed her, housed her. That's a kindness, and I mean to settle it. And I'll take her off your hands, and you good men can get back to your lives, and this poor girl can get the care she—" "Whose horse is that?" The voice came from the edge of the yard. Liam had come up quiet on foot from the north with Amos behind him, and nobody had seen him arrive, and he was standing at the corner of the barn with dust on him and his sleeves rolled, and he had not raised his voice, but every head turned to him because there was something in the 4 flat words that stopped the whole yard cold. Victor turned, smile ready hand, already extending. "You must be the man in charge, Mr. "Whose horse is that?" Liam said again, not taking the hand, nodding at the hired animal. "That's a livery horse out of Dry Creek. I know it. I've hired it myself. Which means you came in on the coach and hired a mount at Dell's. Which means you didn't ride 3 months looking for anybody. You've been in Dry Creek, comfortable, sending word ahead and waiting on it." He walked forward slow, and the men parted for him. "So, before you tell these men one more thing about 3 sleepless months, I'd like you to square that with the horse. Because a man who lies about the little thing you can check tends to be lying about the big thing you can't." The yard went very, very quiet, and Evelyn on the porch watched Victor Hale's smile hold. It held. It was a professional's smile. It did not slip, but she had spent 2 years learning that face, and she saw the thing behind it flicker, just once, the cold thing, the calculating thing, the thing that was in that one flicker, taking the measure of Liam Carter and understanding for the first time that the quiet man in the dusty shirt was not going to be as easy as the 6 ranch hands and would have to be handled another way. "You're very sharp, Mr. Victor said. "Carter." "Mr. Carter, yes. You're right, of course. I've been in Dry Creek some days a man can't ride the whole country without resting his horse and himself. I came the last leg from town today when I got word a woman matching her description had come through." The smile turned rueful, self-deprecating, and it was good it recovered so smoothly that Evelyn saw 2 of the men relax again. "I spoke poorly. 3 months of searching, I meant not 3 months in the saddle. Forgive a tired man his loose words. The point stands. I have papers, I have a claim, I have only her welfare in mind, and I'd hope to do this without turning your yard into a spectacle." "The papers," Liam said. "Let me see them." "They're a physician's private documentation of a lady's medical—" "You waved them at my men like a flag 2 minutes ago," Liam said. "Now they're private. Which is it?" He held out his hand. "Let me see them." And there it was, a hairline crack in the smooth surface, a half-second's hesitation, and Evelyn's heart began to pound, because she knew that hesitation. She knew exactly what it meant. It meant the papers wouldn't survive a careful reading by a man who wasn't already sold. And Victor was calculating whether Liam Carter was already sold and coming up with an answer he didn't like. Of course, Victor said smoothly, and handed them over, because refusing would cost more than the risk, and Victor always did the arithmetic. Liam unfolded the papers. He read them slowly. He was not a fast reader, and he did not pretend to be, and the yard waited on him, and Evelyn waited on him. Her hand pressed flat against her own chest like she could hold her heart still. "This letter," Liam said finally, "is dated the 9th of March, and it's signed by a Dr. Prentice of Columbus, Ohio." He looked up. "It says, 'Miss Harper is, and I'm reading it plain, of a nervous and delicate constitution prone to fancies, and requiring the continued supervision of Mr. Hale for her own safety.'" "That's correct," Victor said. "It's a strange thing for a doctor to write," Liam said. "Medicine of the nerves is a delicate." "It's strange," Liam went on, "because it doesn't say what's wrong with her. A doctor writes down what's wrong. Broke this, fevered that, weak in the lungs. This doctor treated a woman for 3 years if your story's right, and the only thing he could think to write down is that she's prone to fancies and needs you particular to watch her." Liam refolded the paper along its creases careful and held it back out. "That's not a diagnosis, Mr. Hale. That's a leash with a signature on it. And I've bought and sold enough cattle to know the difference between a bill of health and a bill of sale." The silence that followed was total. Evelyn stood on the porch with her hand over her heart and could not breathe, because in 2 years, in the whole long nightmare of Victor Hale, she had never once, not one single time, watched anybody see through him in the first 10 minutes. People saw through him eventually, some of them. Too late always after the damage. But nobody had ever stood in a yard and read his own paper back to him and named it a leash to his face. Victor took the papers back. His hand was perfectly steady. His smile was perfectly in place. "You're a careful man, Mr. Carter," he said, warm as ever. "I respect it, I do. But I wonder if all this cleverness is really a kindness to her." He turned just slightly to include the men again, spreading it wide. "Ask yourselves, gentlemen, and I say this with real sorrow, what kind of woman inspires a man to ride the country for months? What kind of woman leaves in the dead of night without a word? I've tried to be gentle. I've tried to spare her. But you're forcing me to be plain, so I'll be plain." His voice dropped grave, reluctant, devastating. "There was money missing when Evelyn left, a good deal of it. I never reported it. I never wanted the law involved. I wanted her found and cared for, not arrested. But you should know before you stake your good names on a stranger that the woman you've taken in didn't just leave my house. She left it lighter than she found it. And Evelyn felt the ground go out from under her, because that was the new thing. That was the thing he'd added, and it was a masterpiece. Because now the men weren't just weighing a sick woman against a worried man. Now they were weighing a possible thief who'd been in their kitchen alone with the run of the pantry and the household, and the key on a string around her neck for 2 whole weeks. She saw it land. She saw every face in the yard change, and she saw, worst of all, that she had no paper to answer his paper, no seal to answer his seal, nothing but her raw hands, and 2 weeks of meals, and her own bare word. The word of a woman. A physician's letter had just called prone to fancies against the smooth, sorrowful, documented, seal-bearing accusation of a wealthy man in a good gray coat who had once again, exactly as he always did, gotten there first. The word thief hung in the yard, and Evelyn watched it do to the men what Victor had built it to do. Tom looked at the ground. Cooper's hand had drifted without his meaning it toward the pocket where he kept his own small wages. Niels and Pear, who couldn't follow every word, could follow the shape of a yard turning against a person, and they'd gone stiff and uncertain. And Amos. Amos, who'd decided in the first week that Evelyn Harper was all right. Amos was frowning now, deep the frown of a man doing sums he didn't want to do, because a key on a string around her neck was a thing he'd approved of 2 weeks ago, and was a thing that looked different now with the word thief in the air. She's had the run of your pantry, Victor said softly to Amos, specifically because Victor always found the one whose turning would turn the rest. The key to it, I'd imagine. You seem a sensible man. You'd have given her the key. That's only right for a cook. A pause gentle as a blade going in. Have you counted your stores lately? Your household money? I ask only because I've seen this before. It's not wickedness in her. It's the sickness. She doesn't even always know she's done it. And that was the genius of it, Evelyn thought. Standing frozen on the porch, he'd built a trap with no floor. If the stores were short, she was a thief. If they weren't short, she was a thief who hadn't gotten to it yet, or a clever one who'd hidden it. And either way, the counting itself planted the idea, and once the idea of counting was in a man's head, he couldn't get it out. He'd count, and every counting was a small betrayal, and Victor didn't even have to be there when they did it. Count them, Evelyn said. Every head turned to her. Count them, she said again louder, and her voice didn't shake, and she was distantly amazed that it didn't. The pantry, the household money, every cent, every pound of flour. I keep a ledger, it's on the shelf by the flour bin in my hand, dated every day since I came. Counted against the ledger. If a single thing is missing, if $1 or 1 cup of sugar doesn't match what I've written, then he's right, and I'm a thief, and you can put me on that horse yourself. She was looking only at Amos now. But if it matches, if it all matches, then you'll know something about the man who came here today with a paper and a story, and you'll know it for certain, and no smile of his will unknow it. The yard held its breath. Victor's smile did not move, but Evelyn saw the cold thing flicker behind it again, because she'd done something he hadn't planned for. She'd invited the test instead of dreading it. And a guilty woman doesn't invite the test, and Victor knew it, and worse, the men knew it too. Some animal part of them knew that the one begging to be searched is not the one who stole. A ledger can be falsified, Victor said, recovering smooth. A clever hand can make numbers say anything. Then bring the ledger, Amos said. It was the first thing Amos had said in minutes, and it came out hard, and it turned the whole yard because Amos was the one who'd been wavering. Amos was the one Victor had been working, and Amos had just planted his boots. You said count 'em, Amos said to Evelyn. So we'll count 'em. Tom, get the ledger off the shelf by the flour. Cooper, you come with me, 'cause you don't trust nobody, and I want a man who don't trust nobody doing the counting. He looked at Victor, and there was nothing warm in his old face now. You'll wait right here, mister, in the yard, where we can see you. Because I've been running this pantry's accounts under one boss or another for 11 years, and I know to the pound what ought to be in it, ledger or no ledger. So we'll just see. They went in. Tom, Cooper, Amos. And the yard waited, and Victor waited easy and patient. A man with all the time in the world, and Evelyn stood on the porch and made herself look at him. Made herself meet the cold thing behind the smile, because she was done looking away from it. You've gotten harder, Victor said to her low, just for her while the others were inside. Pleasant, almost admiring. The Evelyn I knew wouldn't have said count them. She'd have cried. She cried so prettily. He tilted his head. This one's new. This one's got a spine in her. I wonder where she got it. His eyes went to the barn where Liam stood. Or from whom? Don't, Evelyn said. He's a careful man, your cowboy. I'll give him that. Careful men are the hardest at first. But careful men have the most to lose, Evelyn. That's the thing about them, they build. And a man who builds can be made to fear losing what he built. I've never yet met the careful man I couldn't reach through the thing he loved. The smile deepened, intimate, horrible. Give me a week. I'll find his. And Evelyn understood standing there that Victor had already moved past the pantry. The pantry was going to fail him. He could see that now he'd read the yard, same as she had, and he'd already, in the space of a breath, pivoted to the next thing, and the next thing wasn't her at all. The next thing was Liam. Amos came back out. He was carrying the ledger. He came down off the porch step and stood in the middle of the yard, and he opened the ledger, and he read from it in his flat old voice, item by item, and Cooper stood beside him and confirmed each one. And it went on, flour so many pounds matched, sugar so much matched, the household money to the dollar matched, Salt, pork, beans, coffee. The good dishes all accounted for. Matched, and every matched was a nail. And Evelyn watched Victor's story die one nail at a time in the afternoon light. "It's all here," Amos said, finally closing the ledger. "Every bit, to the ounce and the penny, and I'll tell you what else." He looked up, and his voice got hard as a hammer. "This ledger's been kept every single day. Neat. Honest. A thief don't keep a ledger, mister. A thief don't write down what she took so a body can check her. This here's the account book of a woman who wanted to be able to prove exactly this, on exactly this kind of day, to exactly this kind of man." He tucked the ledger under his arm, like it was hers to protect now. "So your story's got a hole in it, and I don't like holes." A murmur went through the men. Tom lifted his head. Cooper, who trusted nobody, gave Evelyn a single short nod, which from Cooper was practically an embrace. But Victor Hale did not lose his smile, and Evelyn's stomach dropped because a beaten man loses his smile, and Victor's was firmly in place, which meant he wasn't beaten, which meant he'd already stopped fighting for the pantry the moment he saw it turning, and was fighting for something else now, and she didn't yet know what. "Well," Victor said, spreading his hands gracious in defeat, which was its own kind of terrifying. "Then I'm glad. Truly. Whatever else is true, I'm glad she hasn't stolen from good men. That eases my heart." He inclined his head to Amos courtly. "You've defended her honor admirably, sir. I'd expect no less from a decent man. And I hope you'll extend me the same decency, because a mistake about the pantry doesn't change the letter, and it doesn't change her condition, and it doesn't change the fact that I have a lawful claim of guardianship over a woman who is not whatever her bookkeeping well." And there it was. He had conceded the small thing to buy back the big thing. He'd let the pantry go so cleanly, so graciously, that his grace itself became a kind of argument. "See how reasonable I am. See how I bend to the truth when the truth is shown. So surely you can trust me on the rest." "Guardianship," Liam said. He'd come off the barn wall. He walked into the middle of the yard unhurried, and he stopped in front of Victor, close now, closer than before. "You keep saying that word. Lawful claim. Guardianship." Liam's voice was quiet and even. "So let me understand it plain, the way a plain man needs things. You're telling me you've got a legal paper, not a doctor's letter, a real legal paper from a court that says you have the say-so over this grown woman, where she goes, what she does, whether she can leave. Is that what you're telling these men? In effect." "Not in effect." Liam didn't raise his voice, but something in it dropped 10 degrees. "In fact, yes or no? Is there a court order? A judge's signature? A guardianship granted by law? Because in effect is what a man says when the answer is no, but he wants you to hear yes." The pause was a half-second long. Evelyn counted it. She'd learned to count Victor's pauses the way a sailor learns to count between lightning and thunder to know how close the storm was. "There are proceedings," Victor said, "in motion." "So no," Liam said. "There's no order. There's a letter you paid a doctor for, and there's proceedings in motion, which is a thing that costs nothing to say. You rode out here to take a grown woman off my land on the strength of a doctor's note and a good coat, and you were counting on nobody asking you the plain question." He looked at Victor for a long moment. "You've done this before, haven't you? This exact thing. This is a road you know." Victor said nothing, but the smile for the first time thinned. "How many times?" Liam said very quietly. "How many towns? How many men in yards like this one that you talked around with a paper and a sad story before one of them thought to ask if the paper meant anything?" He shook his head slowly. "You're not looking for a sick woman, Mr. Hale. A man looking for a sick woman brings a doctor. A man looking for a sick woman brings the law because the law would help him if his claim was real. You brought neither. You came alone with a letter and a coat to a place with no sheriff and no judge, and you counted on decent men handing her over quiet before anybody who knew the law ever heard about it." Liam's jaw set. "That's not a rescue. That's a taking. And I've spent my whole life around men who take things that aren't theirs, and I know one when he's standing in my yard." The yard was dead silent, and Evelyn on the porch felt something she had not felt in 2 years. and did not have a name for. Any more the feeling of watching someone put words to the thing that had been done to her, the exact true words in front of witnesses, without flinching. She'd carried the truth alone so long, she'd half stopped believing it was a truth other people could see. And here was a man seeing it, saying it, naming Victor Hale in his own yard in front of 6 hands, and not being charmed and not being cowed and not being bought. She had to grip the porch rail. Her knees had gone. But Victor Hale had not built a life on losing yards, and he did not lose this one all at once. He let the silence sit. He let it get long. And then he did the most dangerous thing he could have done. He stopped smiling. He let his face go grave and tired and human, and he spoke to Liam not as a charmer working a mark, but as one serious man to another, and his voice was low, and it was reasonable, and it was God help them all warm. "You're right," Victor said. The word landed like a stone in a still pond. "You're right that there's no court order. You're right that I came alone. You're right that I know this road." He nodded slow, a man laying down his weapons. "I'll tell you why, and then you can decide what kind of man I am, and I'll abide by it because you've earned that much with how you've handled this." He drew a breath. "I love her." Evelyn's blood turned to water. "I've loved her for 2 years," Victor said, and his voice did the thing, the perfect crack. "And no, we were never married because she wouldn't have me, and no, there's no court that gave me any right to her because there isn't one. You're right. There's only a man who watched a woman he loves come apart at the seams and couldn't stop chasing after her even when every law and every friend told him to let her go." He looked at the ground, ashamed, magnificent. "The doctor's letter is real, but I'll confess I leaned on him for it because it was the only paper that let me look for her without looking like a spurned man chasing a woman who left him. Which is what I am. Which is what I've been too proud to say in a yard full of strangers." He lifted his eyes, wet now, actually wet. "So there's your plain truth, Mr. Carter, plainer than you asked for. I'm not her guardian. I'm just a fool who loves her and can't stop. And if that's a crime, then I'm guilty. And you can send me off your land and I'll go. But don't mistake a broken heart for a wicked one. She's not a prisoner I'm hunting. She's a woman I lost." And Evelyn watched it work. She watched it work on all of them at once, the way it had worked on so many before, because it was good. It was the best he had. It took every single thing. Liam had correctly named. No order came alone. Knows this road paid for the letter, and it agreed with all of it, conceded all of it, and then folded all of it into a new story, where every damning fact became proof of love instead of proof of predation. He'd turned his own guilt into evidence of a broken heart. He'd turned getting caught into honesty. He'd turned the whole yard in 90 seconds from "this man is a taker" to "this man is a heartbroken fool," and heartbroken fools were forgivable. Heartbroken fools were even sympathetic. And Evelyn saw Tom's face soften, and saw one of the Swedes murmur to the other, and saw even Amos's hard frown loosen half an inch, because they'd all of them loved somebody, and a man undone by love was a man they understood. "That's a good speech," Liam said. "It's not a speech. It's a good speech," Liam repeated. "And I mean that. I believed about half of it while you were saying it, and I'm not a man who believes easy, so it's good." He was quiet a moment. "But here's the trouble with it. You just told these men plain that the doctor's letter was a lie you paid for. You said it yourself just now out of your own mouth to seem honest. And it worked. I saw it work. But you can't have it both ways, Mr. Hale. Either that letter's real, and she's sick, and you're a guardian, which was your first story, or that letter's a lie you bought, and you're just a jilted man chasing a woman who left you, which is your second story." Liam took a step closer. "You've told me 2 stories in one afternoon, and they can't both be true. So I'm left with a man who'll say whatever the moment needs. And that man I don't believe at all, not the half I liked, not the half I didn't. A man who changes his whole self to fit the room is a man with no self in him I can trust." The half inch of softening in Amos's face reversed. Tom's head came up. and the yard which had swung toward Victor on the strength of the broken heart speech swung back. Evelyn felt it swing, felt the whole weight of 6 men's judgment slide back across the yard like water, finding its level. Because Liam had done the one thing that undid Victor, the one thing almost nobody ever did. In time he'd caught the 2 stories against each other and held them up side by side and refused to let go of either. For one moment, one single moment, Evelyn let herself believe it was over. That was her mistake. She knew better. She of all people knew better. Victor Hale was never more dangerous than in the instant after he lost, because losing was the thing that finally made him drop the smile for real. "You," Victor said. He was looking at Liam, and something had changed in his face. And it was worse than any charm, because it was true. It was the first true thing he'd shown all day. The warmth was gone. The grief was gone. What was left was flat and patient and cold. The face of a man who has decided to stop persuading and start hunting. "You're a very good man, Mr. Carter," Victor said, and his voice was pleasant and quiet and absolutely without warmth. "Careful, fair, hard to fool. You've built something out here, haven't you? Land, stock, the respect of these men. Took you years, I'd guess. A man like you doesn't inherit a place like this. He builds it brick by brick, favor by favor, and he builds it careful because careful is the only way it stands." He smiled again, but it was a different smile now, and Evelyn's whole body went cold to see it, because it was the real one, the one under all the others. The thing about a built thing, though, it can come down. A word in the right ear, a rumor at the right table, a question raised in the right town at the right time about a rancher who took in a strange woman and hid her from the man with a lawful claim. He let it sit. You'll notice I said lawful again. It doesn't matter that it's not true, Mr. Carter. It never has to be true. It only has to be said in enough ears by a man with a good coat and a patient nature. You proved today you can win a yard. Let's find out if you can win a county. He turned unhurried and gathered the hired horse's reins. "I'll be at the hotel in Dry Creek," he said to the yard at large, mounting up. "For as long as it takes. I'm a patient man. I've spent 3 months. I can spend 3 more. And every day I spend, Mr. Carter, is a day I spend talking. To your neighbors, to your buyers, to the bank that carries your paper if you carry any, and men like you always carry some." He gathered the reins. "You did right by her today. I'll grant it. Sleep well on it. But ask yourself before you get too comfortable, how many of your neighbors were at that cattle sale today? How many good men shook your hand this afternoon before I ever rode up? And how do you think they'll feel next season when they hear the rancher they've been dealing with is sheltering a thief and a runaway from her own family, and lying to a grieving man's face to do it?" He settled his coat. "Truth is a slow horse, Mr. Carter. A lie's already at the county line before the truth's got its boots on. You've got a good spread here. It'd be a shame." And he rode out at a walk in no hurry at all, a man who had lost the battle and knew to the bone that he'd just told them exactly how he meant to win the war. And the terrible thing, the thing that put ice in Evelyn's chest as she watched the good gray coat get smaller down the road, was that every word of it was true. Not the lies he'd tell. The strategy. That part was true. She'd seen it work. She'd watched Victor Hale unmake a man's whole standing in a town over the course of a single winter, never once raising his voice, never once telling a lie he could be caught in just talking patient and pleasant, until a good man's name meant something rotten, and nobody could say quite when it had turned. The yard was silent for a long time after he'd gone. "Well," Amos said finally heavily, "that's a snake." "That's a snake," Liam agreed. "You want I should ride after him?" "Have a word," Cooper said, and there was something in how he said a word that suggested Cooper's words came with fists. No. Liam was watching the road where Victor had gone. "That's what he wants. Man like that, you lay a hand on him. He's got his story handed to him. Violent rancher ran him off with threats, exactly what you'd expect from a man hiding a woman he oughtn't. No, you don't fight a talker with fists. You fight a talker with the truth out loud in front of the same people he's whispering to. He turned. But he's right about one thing. He's already a day ahead of us on the road, and the truth's still pulling its boots on. So we'd best get it moving. He looked at Evelyn then, for the first time since the counting, and she came down off the porch on legs that still weren't sure of her, and she stood in front of him in the middle of the yard, with all 6 men watching. "I need to know it all," Liam said. Quiet. Just to her, though they all could hear. "Not because I doubt you. After today I don't. But because that man is going to spend the next month telling this county a story, and the only thing that beats his story is the true one. And I can't tell a true one I don't know. So when you're ready tonight, tomorrow, whenever you can carry it, I need the whole of it. Everything he is. Everything he did. All of it." He held her eyes. "You've been carrying it alone a long time. I'm asking you to set it down where I can pick up an end of it. That's all. Just an end of it. Just an end of—" And Evelyn Harper, who had told the whole truth to exactly no one in 2 years, who had learned that telling the truth only handed Victor more rope, that every person she'd trusted with it had eventually been turned. That the truth was the most dangerous thing she owned, stood in a dusty yard in front of 6 men and a quiet rancher who had just twice in one afternoon refused to be bought or fooled or frightened off, and felt the 2-year-old weight in her chest shift just slightly for the first time. "It's ugly," she said. "What he did. It's uglier than what you're imagining, and you've imagined plenty today." "I don't need it pretty," Liam said. "I need it true." She looked at him a long moment. "Then get Amos to put coffee on," she said. "The real kind, not the mud you drink because it's going to be a long night. And send the boys to bed because some of this isn't for a yard." She wrapped her arms around herself. "And Liam." It was the first time she'd used his name. She saw him notice it. "When I'm done telling you, you're going to want to ride to Dry Creek tonight and kill him. And you can't. Because that's the one thing that turns his lie into the truth. So promise me now, before I start, that whatever I tell you, you'll let me choose what we do with it. The way you let me choose everything else." Her voice caught just once and steadied. "He took every choice I had. Don't take this one, even to protect me. Especially to protect me." And Liam Carter looked at her for a long moment in the failing light, and then he took his hat off the first time she'd seen him bare his head, and he held it against his chest, and he said, "You have my word. It's your story. It stays your story. Whatever we do, you choose it." Evelyn nodded once. And then, for the first time since a night 2 years gone that she had never spoken of to a living soul, she opened her mouth to tell it. She started at the beginning, because the beginning was the part that made everything after it possible. And if Liam didn't understand the beginning, he wouldn't understand how a smart woman ended up where she'd ended up. "I was 19 when I went to work for him," she said. "Bookkeeper. My father had just died and left debts, and my mother was sick, and Victor Hale had a fine house in Columbus, and a business that needed a girl who was good with figures, and I was good with figures. That was the truth of me. Before all this, I was good with figures. I want you to hold on to that because he spent 2 years teaching everyone, including me, that I couldn't be trusted to count to 10. But I came to him a bookkeeper. Remember that." "I'll remember it," Liam said. They were at the long table, the two of them, the coffee between them, the boys sent off to the bunkhouse, all but Amos, who'd asked to stay, and Evelyn had let him, because Amos had defended her in the yard, and because some part of her had learned tonight that a witness was a thing worth having. "He was kind at first," she said. "That's the part nobody believes after. They think a man like Victor must have shown his teeth early, and you'd have to be a fool to miss it. But he didn't. For most of a year, he was the kindest employer a girl could want. He paid my mother's doctor. He gave me an advance when the rent came due. He remembered my birthday. He told me I was the smartest person in his employ, and he said it in front of others, so it wasn't just flattery, it was reputation. And I was 19 and grieving, and I'd never had a powerful man look at me and see something worth keeping." Her hands tightened around the cup. "That's how it starts, not with cruelty, with being chosen. He finds the person who's alone, and he makes them unalone, and he does it so completely that pretty soon he's the only unalone you've got. And you don't notice because it feels like being loved. Amos made a low sound in his throat. My late wife had a brother like that. Different flavor, same recipe. Then you know, Evelyn said, that by the time you see it, he's already the ground you're standing on. When did you see it? Liam asked. Quiet. The doctor, she said. My mother's doctor. Victor was paying him, I told you that. And one day the doctor came to me, private frightened. And he told me Victor had stopped paying 2 months back, and had told him to keep quiet about it, to keep treating my mother, and put it on account. And that Victor had said... Her voice snagged. She made it go on. He said Victor told him let the girl keep thinking I'm paying it. It keeps her grateful. The kitchen was silent. That's when I saw it, Evelyn said. Not a cruelty, a calculation. He'd figured out to the penny how much kindness kept me grateful, and he was managing it the way you'd manage a herd, giving just enough feed to keep the animal following. My mother's health was a lever. My gratitude was a ledger he kept in his head. And I understood, standing in front of that frightened doctor, that everything, every kindness, every birthday, every word about how smart I was, every bit of it had been spending, and he'd been keeping the account, and I was in debt to him in a way I'd never agreed to and couldn't see the bottom of. Liam's jaw had gone tight, but he didn't speak. He'd promised. He held it. So I did the stupidest, brave thing I ever did, Evelyn said. I confronted him. 19:20 by then I stood in his study, and I told him I knew he'd stopped paying the doctor, and I told him I was going to leave his employ and find honest work, and I told him I'd pay back every cent of what he'd spent on my mother, even if it took me my whole life. She laughed, and there was no humor in it, only old horror. I thought that was the end of it. I thought you could just leave. I thought a person could just decide to stop being managed and walk out the door. And you couldn't, Amos said. He smiled at me, Evelyn said. The way he smiled in your yard today. And he said, Of course you can leave, Evelyn. You were never a prisoner. But before you go, let's talk about a few things so you understand your situation. She closed her eyes. And then he laid it out for me. Calm, reasonable, the way he does. He'd been keeping a different set of books, one where I was the thief. Withdrawals from the business I'd never made in my hand, forged going back a year. Letters I'd supposedly written. A whole paper trail built patient all that time he was being kind to me. He'd been building the cage the entire time, board by board, so that on the day I tried the door, it'd already be locked from the outside. Her eyes opened. He didn't build it because I did anything. He built it because he builds it for everyone. That's what I didn't understand until it was too late. The kindness wasn't the opposite of the cage. The kindness was the cage. He was measuring me for it from the first week. Liam set his coffee down very slowly, very carefully, like a man who didn't trust his hands. He told me, Evelyn went on, that if I left, he'd go to the law with his books, and I'd hang, or near enough embezzlement forgery, a poor grieving girl who'd robbed her kind employer. And who'd believe me? A 20-year-old bookkeeper with a dead father and a sick mother, and no money and no name against a wealthy man with documents and standing, and a whole town that thought the world of him. He said it gently. He said, I don't want to do that, Evelyn. I care for you. I'd never want to see you hang. So let's just go on as we were. You'll stay. You'll keep the books. And we'll never speak of this again, and everything will be fine as long as you don't make me open that drawer. She looked at Liam. That's the trap he builds. Not a wall you can push against. A drawer he owns. And every day you wake up knowing he owns it, and the not opening of it is a kindness he's doing you, and you're supposed to be grateful for the kindness of the cage staying shut. How long? Liam said. His voice had gone very low and very rough. How long did he keep you in that? 2 years, Evelyn said. 2 years I kept his books and smiled at his dinners and thanked him for his kindness and slept in a house I couldn't leave because leaving meant the drawer and the drawer meant the rope. 2 years I watched him do it to other people too. A business partner he ruined slow over a winter. A girl who came after me that he... She stopped. Some things weren't for the table. 2 years I got smaller and smaller. and more grateful, and more afraid. And the worst part, Liam, the part I can't make anyone understand, the worst part is that I started to believe him. I started to believe I was the things he said I was: unstable, prone to fancies, not to be trusted. Because when one voice tells you a thing every single day, calm and reasonable and never cruel, and there's no other voice anywhere to tell you different, you believe it. I believed I was crazy. There were mornings I couldn't tell you what was real, because the only person telling me what was real was the person building the cage. The kitchen was dead quiet. Amos had turned his face away. "So how'd you get out?" Liam asked. And here Evelyn stopped. Here, for the first time all night, she hesitated. And Liam saw it, and he waited because he'd learned that her hesitations were where the true things lived. "The girl," she said finally. "The one that came after me. Younger. 17. He was starting on her the way he'd started on me, the kindness, the choosing the little debts. And I watched him do it, and I recognized every step, and I understood I was watching myself 2 years back, and I understood that if I stayed and kept quiet to protect my own neck, I was letting it happen to her the way it had happened to me." Her voice was barely above the fire's tick. "So I did the one thing he never planned for. I stopped protecting myself." She looked up. "I found the drawer. The real books, the forged ones. All of it. I'd kept his accounts for 2 years. I knew where every paper in that house lived. And one night I took the forged books, the ones that framed me, and I burned them in his own study fireplace, every page, and I stood there and watched them burn." A terrible small smile. "And then I took the real books. The ones that showed what he'd actually done, the partner he'd ruined, the money. He'd actually moved the doctor, he'd stopped paying, all of it in his own hand and mine. 2 years of the truth. I took the real books, and I left in the night with the girl, and I put her on a train to an aunt in Chicago with money. Yes, all right, money I took. He can call me a thief for that, if he likes. I took his money to buy a 17-year-old girl a train ticket away from him, and I'd do it again and burn in hell smiling." Liam had gone completely still. "The real books," he said slowly. "The ones in his hand, that prove what he did." "Yes." "Where are they, Evelyn?" And Evelyn Harper looked at Liam Carter across the long table, and she reached up and she pulled the string from around her neck, the string he'd all watched her keep, the pantry key on the string Victor had pointed to in the yard, as proof she'd had the run of the stores. And on the string beside the pantry key was a small flat brass key. None of them had ever looked at twice. "They're in a bank in Cheyenne," she said. "In a box that key opens. I've carried the key on my neck for 2 years next to whatever key I had to whatever kitchen or door was keeping me alive that month, because it's the only thing in the world Victor Hale is actually afraid of. And I was never ever going to be caught without it." She set the string on the table between them. "That's why he doesn't just let me go, Liam. That's the thing I couldn't tell you at the fork. He's not chasing a runaway. He's not chasing a sick woman, or a jilted love, or even a thief. He's chasing the one person alive who's got his own hand on paper proving what he is, proof that'd hang him, not me. He has to get me back, not to cage me. To find out where the books are. And to make sure that before I ever open my mouth to the wrong person, everyone in 100 miles already believes I'm a mad woman and a thief, so that when I do talk, when I finally show somebody those books, they'll look at the books, and then they'll look at the crazy thief everybody's been warned about, and they won't believe a word." The fire ticked. "That's what he was doing in your yard today," she said. "That's what the doctor's letter was for. He's not building a case to take me. He's building a case to discredit me ahead of time in every town I might run to, so that the truth I'm carrying is dead before I ever speak it. He got to Dry Creek before I did, because he always gets there first. He plants the madwoman, and then wherever I land, the ground's already poisoned. That's why I run, and it never ends. I'm not running from a man. I'm running from a story he tells faster than I can get anywhere. And the books that could end it are the very thing that keep him hunting me. Because as long as I hold them, I'm the one loose thread that can pull his whole life apart. And as long as he hunts me, I can never sit still long enough to pull it." For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then Amos quietly from the corner, Well, I'll be damned. The books, Liam said. In Cheyenne. Have you ever tried to use them? Take them to a lawman. A judge. With what standing? Evelyn said, and the old exhaustion was back in her voice. Think it through the way I've thought it through 1,000 nights. I walk into a sheriff's office, a woman with no money, no name, no home, that a wealthy man has been telling 3 counties is a delusional thief, and I say the respectable Mr. Hale is a criminal, and I can prove it, the proof's in a bank box in Cheyenne. And the sheriff sends a wire to check on me, and what comes back? A physician's letter, a grieving guardian, a pattern of running. By the time I've unlocked the box, he's unlocked me. He's already told them exactly who I am, and they read his true books through the lie he built about me, and they decide I forged those too, or stole them, or made them up in one of my fancies. She shook her head. The books are only worth something if the person holding them is believed. And he spent 2 years, and he's spending right now, making sure I'm the one person on earth who can't be believed. That's the whole architecture of it, Liam. The proof and the poison wound together. He made the truth untellable by me before I ever ran. I've been carrying the key to his prison for 2 years, and I can't turn it, because he took away the one thing that makes a key work a hand people trust to hold it. And there it was, the whole of it. Laid on the table at last, 2 years of it, and Evelyn sat back emptied out hollow in a way that was almost peace, because whatever came now, she was no longer carrying it alone in the dark. Liam was quiet for a long, long time. When he finally spoke, it wasn't what she expected. You said the books are only worth something if the person holding them is believed. Yes, then the answer's not to make people believe you. Liam turned the brass key over slowly in his fingers. It's to put the books in a hand they already believe. Evelyn frowned. What hand I don't have? The cattle buyer who was here today, Liam said. Fella named Grimes, bought stock off half the county. Been dealing straight with every rancher between here and Cheyenne for 20 years. His word at a bank, at a courthouse, and a county seat it carries. And he was standing in this very kitchen 4 hours ago, telling me I'd done well for myself, and I fed him your biscuits, and he shook my hand and called me folks with their affairs in order. He set the key down. Grimes doesn't know you from Eve. Hale can't have poisoned him against you, because he's not from around here. He's from Cheyenne. He does business in Cheyenne. He banks in Cheyenne. Liam looked up, and something had kindled in his flat, calm eyes that Evelyn hadn't seen there before. A man like Grimes could walk into a bank in Cheyenne on his own good name with the box key and a letter of authorization signed by you in front of witnesses, and open that box and see what's in it, before Hale ever knew the wind had shifted. And once a man like Grimes has seen it, has held Hale's own hand on paper, then it's not a madwoman making a claim anymore. It's Elias Grimes, who everybody trusts, saying I saw the books myself, and they're real, and this man is what she says he is. The kitchen had gone very still. You'd turn his own trick against him, Amos said slowly. He's out there right now poisoning your name, so nobody'll believe the truth when she tells it. So you don't have her tell it. You have a man he can't touch tell it in a town he can't reach in time. Truth's a slow horse, Liam said. He told me that himself in the yard thinking it was a threat, but a slow horse gets there just the same if you set it out early enough and don't let anybody spook it. He's got a head start telling his lie. But he doesn't know we've got the one thing his lie was built to bury, and he doesn't know we know a man whose word beats his coat. He looked at Evelyn. You said the trap has no floor. I don't think that's right. I think it's got a floor, and the floor is this: the whole thing only works as long as you're the only one who can tell it. The second the story's in a mouth he can't discredit, the whole cage comes down, because the cage was never made of walls. It was made of nobody believing you. Give the believing to somebody else, and there's nothing left holding it up. Evelyn stared at him. For 2 years, she had turned the problem over, every way it would turn, every night 10,000 nights, and every path had ended at the same wall. No one will believe me, and she had never once, not one single time, thought to hand the believing to someone who wasn't her, because Victor had made it about her. He'd made her the whole battlefield. He'd spent 2 years teaching her that her word was the only weapon she had, and simultaneously teaching the world her word was worthless, so that she fought and fought on the one ground where she could never win. And it had never occurred to her to fight somewhere else, on someone else's ground, with someone else's name. "That could work," she whispered. "God help me, that could actually—" And then she stopped, because a thought had come to her cold and sudden, and it drained the color right back out of her face. "What is it?" Liam said instantly. "The buyer," Evelyn said. "Grimes. He left here 4 hours ago, riding back toward Dry Creek. Where's Victor Hale right now?" The kitchen went dead silent. "At the hotel in Dry Creek," Amos said slowly. "He told us. Said he'd be at the hotel, for as long as it took. He rode out an hour after Grimes," Evelyn said. Her voice had gone thin and fast. "The same road, toward the same town. And Victor Hale never in his life rode past a useful man without stopping to charm him. He'll have caught up to Grimes on the road, or he'll find him at the hotel tonight, a cattle buyer, a man of standing, a man who was just at Red Hollow who just met me. Liam Victor will sit down across from Grimes at that hotel, and he will tell him the whole story tonight. The madwoman, the thief, the grieving guardian. He'll poison Grimes tonight over supper before we've even hitched a wagon." Her hands had started to shake. "The one man whose word could save me. And Victor's going to reach him first. He always reaches them first. That's the whole—" "Then we don't wait for morning," Liam said, and he was already on his feet. "You can't ride to Dry Creek in the dark. I can ride that road blind, and I have." He was pulling his coat off the peg. "Amos saddle Ash in the bay. Evelyn, get that key and paper to write on. We'll do the letter of authorization here now tonight, and I'll want your hand on it, and mine and Amos's underneath as witnesses, so it's ironbound before we ever reach town." He turned. "We get to Grimes before Hale finishes his supper. We tell him the true thing first, not to beg him to believe it, just to ask him to go look with his own eyes at his own bank in his own town. A fair man doesn't have to believe a story to agree to open a box. And once Grimes has agreed to look before Hale's had a chance to close his mind, then it doesn't matter what Hale says over the second cup of coffee. Because you can't unask a fair man to look at the truth. Not once he's said he will." Evelyn was on her feet too. Now her heart slamming the exhaustion of a moment ago burned clean off her. "And if Victor's already got to him," she said, "if we ride in and Grimes has already heard the whole poison and looks at me like I'm what Victor says I am—" Liam stopped at the door. He looked back at her. "Then you'll do the thing you did today in the yard," he said. "You'll say, 'Count them.' You'll invite the test instead of dreading it. You'll be the one woman in the world who wants the box opened, who's been begging 2 years for somebody to open it, and Grimes will see that same as my men saw it, because a guilty soul runs from the light, and you have never once run toward it, and that reads on a person. Evelyn, it reads plain as a brand you said so yourself about the thing that was done to you." He set his hat on his head. He got there first. All right, he's always gotten there first. But getting there first only wins if the person coming second has got nothing true to carry. And tonight, for the first time in 2 years, you're not riding into that town empty-handed and alone with nothing but your word against his coat. He held the door. "You've got a witness. You've got a key. And you've got a man whose name he can't touch sitting in a hotel dining room, 4 hours ahead of us, and one honest question away from being on your side." Evelyn snatched the string off the table and put it back around her neck, and the 2 keys settled cold against her chest, the kitchen key that had kept her alive, and the brass key that could end the man who'd hunted her, and for the first time in 2 years, they didn't feel like the weight of a secret. They felt like a hand of cards she was finally about to play. "Then let's go catch a slow horse," she said, "before the fast one poisons the only well we've got." And she went out into the dark toward the waiting horses with Liam beside her, and Amos already cinching the girths and the race for Elias Grimes. For the one believing mouth Victor Hale had not yet reached, began before the coffee had even gone cold on the table behind them. They fought. The weeks that followed were a war conducted with paper and horseback and ink, and Luke waged it the way he did everything patiently, thoroughly, without a wasted motion. He rode to the county seat and filed. He sat up nights at the kitchen table, writing letters in his careful hand, and Elena sat across from him and told him names, every name she could remember, every whispered story, every woman who'd left Harold Vance's employ suddenly and never quite been the same. Sarah, who'd gone to nurse an aunt. The laundress before her, whose name Elena had never known, but whose eyes she remembered. And above all, the first wife, Catherine Vance, dead of a fever at 26, buried fast, mourned publicly and lavishly, by a husband who'd worn black for exactly the socially required interval, and then advertised for a young bride from 3 states away. "Somebody knows the truth of Catherine," Elena said one night. "A house that size, there's always someone who knows. A cook, a maid. Somebody was in that house when she died and knows it wasn't any fever." "Then we find them," Luke said, and dipped his pen again. The first blow of the war landed against them hard. A week after Luke filed, a lawyer arrived from back east, a sleek, expensive man in a coat finer than anything in the whole of Hollow Creek, and he brought papers of his own. Harold Vance was not going to defend himself against these wild accusations, the lawyer announced. Harold Vance was going to countersue for breach of promise, for the return of gifts and monies advanced, and the lawyer said this part with a thin, cold smile, for a competency hearing to determine whether Miss Elena Carter was of sound enough mind to be making these serious allegations at all, given her well-documented history of instability, hysteria, and flight. "He's going to put you on trial," Luke said grimly, reading the papers by lamplight. "Not himself, you. He's going to make the whole thing about whether you're crazy." "I know," Elena said, and her hands were steady. "It's what he always does. He did it to me for 3 years in private. Now he's just doing it in a courtroom." She looked up. "But there's a difference this time, Luke. This time I get to answer back. This time there's a record. Every rotten thing he says about me, it goes down on paper in front of witnesses, and it can't be unsaid or twisted later in the dark. Let him call me crazy in the light. I've been called crazy in the dark my whole life, and nobody ever heard it but me. Let the whole town hear it. Let them hear him do to me in public exactly what he did in private, and then let them watch me still standing." She almost smiled. "He doesn't understand yet that he's already lost. He thinks the fight is whether people believe him. It's not. The fight was always whether I'd stay silent. And I'm done being silent. That's the whole war, and I won it the day I unpacked my bag." The trial was set for the last week of autumn in the courthouse at the county seat, and word of it spread the way such things do, faster than any newspaper. A rich Eastern businessman, a runaway bride, accusations of cruelty, a competency, hearing a countersuit, it had everything, and people came from 3 counties to fill the gallery. Elena had been afraid of that, of the crowd of all those staring strangers who'd come to gawk at the crazy girl. But when the day came, and she walked into that packed courtroom on Luke's arm, in a plain dark dress she'd sewn herself, and felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes land on her, she did not go small. She did not lower her head. She had spent 5 weeks learning, and then 5 more weeks unlearning a lifetime. And she lifted her chin, and she looked back at them, and she found her seat, and she sat with her spine straight. Harold Vance was already there. He looked as he always looked, magnificent. Composed, prosperous, faintly sorrowful, a patient man burdened by an unpleasant duty. He wore his grief for the whole business, like a well-cut coat. And when Elena entered, he turned and looked at her, and he let his face fill with a tender, wounded, loving sadness. "See how she's been turned against me? See what these people have done to my poor sick girl." And he held her eyes, waiting, the way he'd held them 1,000 times, waiting for her to break, to flinch, to look away. Elena looked back at him, and she did not flinch, and she did not look away, and she watched because she was still the best reader of Harold Vance who had ever lived. She watched the faint flicker of unease cross behind his eyes when she didn't crumble the first small crack in the mask, the first sign that the ground had shifted under him and he didn't yet know how far. His lawyer went first, and he was good, and it was every bit as bad as Elena had feared. He painted her. A troubled young woman, orphaned, unstable, with no family to vouch for her character. A pattern of flight she'd run from her situation not once, but habitually. A vivid imagination that blurred tragically into delusion. And a generous, long-suffering benefactor in Mr. Vance, who had offered this poor creature his name and his protection, and been repaid with wild accusations and public humiliation. The lawyer spoke for an hour, and by the end of it, Elena could feel the gallery leaning his way, could feel the town's sympathy sliding toward the rich, sad man, and away from the strange, nervous girl, and the old terror rose in her, the old certainty. See, no one believes you. No one ever believes you. You're going to lose. And then Luke, sitting beside her, put his hand flat on the table between them. Not touching her. Just there. Within reach. The way the blanket had been within reach on the wagon seat that first day. And Elena looked at that steady hand, and she remembered that she was not alone, that she had never been alone since the day she stepped off the train and the terror crested and broke and rolled back out to sea. Then it was their turn. Doc Halloran testified first, and the small round doctor was devastating, precisely because he was so calm, so professional, so entirely without drama. He described what he'd found. 2 ribs cracked and knitting badly at an age, and in a pattern inconsistent with any single fall. Old bruising in a stage of healing that spoke of repeated injury over months, not one accident. A sprained wrist, never set. He read it out like a grocer reading a bill, flat and factual, and the lawyer's attempts to shake him couldn't. A fall account for this doctor. Couldn't a clumsy woman broke against him like water on stone. A fall, Doc Halloran said, does not bruise a woman on the underside of both arms, counselor. You get bruised there one way. You get bruised there raising your arms to cover your face. The gallery went very quiet. Then Martha climbed into the witness chair, 62 years old and iron straight, and she told them what she'd heard on the porch, the word property said plain, and the threat to burn a good man's ranch to the ground over a woman. And then, before Harold's lawyer could rise, before anyone could stop her, Martha kept going. She told the rest of it. 30 years. A daughter with a bruise on her arm asking, "Is this just what it is, Mama, because you always stayed?" And a courtroom full of strangers who'd come to gawk, sat frozen, and listened to an old woman testify to the thing that half of them had lived, and none of them had ever heard said out loud. And Elena watched faces in that gallery change, watched women reach for other women's hands, watched a farmer in the 3rd row put his face down into his own palms, watched the room stop being a crowd that had come to judge a crazy girl and start being something else entirely. I stayed 30 years. Martha finished, and my silence was a lesson, and my girls learned it. I will not stay silent one more day, not while I've got breath. That man, she pointed, and her old hand didn't shake, is exactly what I ran from. I'd know him anywhere. They all wear the same face. And then it was Elena's turn. She rose. She walked to the chair. She sat, and she was sworn, and she looked out across the packed courtroom, and there was Harold, 10 feet away, watching her with that patient, wounded, loving sorrow, waiting, still, waiting, still. Certain that when she opened her mouth to speak against him, the years of training would take hold, and her voice would fail, and she'd falter and prove every word his lawyer had said. Elena opened her mouth, and she did not falter. She told them everything. Not wildly, not hysterically, she'd learned from Doc Halloran. She told it flat and plain and true, which was 1,000 times more terrible than any weeping. She told them about the courtship that everyone had called such a fine match, and what it was really like behind the fine front door. She told them about discipline, which was his word for it, and for your own good, which was his other word. She told them about the night that cracked her ribs, and the morning 3 days before the wedding, when she understood with perfect clarity that if she let him marry her, she would not survive the marriage, and about the window at 4 in the morning. She told them about being taught every day for 3 years that she was crazy, that she imagined things, that she made him do it until she'd nearly come to believe it herself. And I might have believed it forever, she said, and now she turned her head and looked directly at Harold, and she held his eyes the way he'd always held hers. Except that I stepped off a train 2,000 miles away, and a man I'd never met looked at my face for 2 seconds and knew. He knew what took me 3 years to let myself believe. And I understood then that it was never in my head. If a stranger could see it across a train platform in 2 seconds, then it was real. It was always real. And every single time you told me it wasn't Harold, you were lying, not because I was crazy, but because you needed me to think I was. Because a woman who knows she's being hurt might leave, and a woman who thinks she's crazy will stay and thank you for putting up with her. The courtroom was so silent, Elena could hear the clock on the wall. And then Harold Vance made his mistake. He'd sat through all of it with his mask perfectly in place, the picture of dignified suffering. But he was a man who could not bear to lose. And he could feel it slipping, could feel the room turning, and something in him. The real thing. The thing behind the mask. The thing Elena knew could not sit still and let a used-up girl take the room away from him. He leaned over to his lawyer and whispered too loud, forgetting himself for one fatal instant in his fury. And the words carried in that dead silent room carried all the way to the gallery, carried to the judge's bench. "Shut her up! I don't care how. She belongs to me, and I'll not sit here and be lectured by my own property." He heard it land the instant it left his mouth. He saw the gallery recoil. He saw the judge's head come up sharp. And Elena watched the mask fall off. Harold Vance entirely. Watched the real face come out into the light at last in front of 100 witnesses. In the one place he could never take it back. And she understood that she had won, that Luke had been right all along, that the war had never been about whether they'd believe her. It had only ever been about getting Harold Vance to show them in the light what he was. And he'd done it himself. His own rage had done what no testimony could. But the war wasn't quite over. Because there was one more soldier coming. One more witness. Luke's letters had shaken loose, and no one in that courtroom knew she was there. The doors at the back opened. A woman came in. Middle-aged, plainly dressed, travel-worn, with the careful stillness Elena would have known anywhere, because it was her own stillness, and Martha's the way you hold yourself when you've spent years being afraid. She walked down the center aisle of that packed courtroom with a folded paper in her hands, and she did not look at Harold. She looked straight ahead, and Harold's face, Elena was watching his face. Harold's face went the color of ash. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the woman said to the judge in a quiet voice that carried anyway. "My name is Ruth Ackerman. I was housekeeper to Mr. Harold Vance for 9 years. I was in the house when his first wife died." She unfolded the paper with trembling hands. "Catherine did not die of a fever. I have carried what I know for 11 years because I was afraid of him, and because I thought I was the only one, and because he told me no one would ever believe a servant over a gentleman. And then a letter came from a rancher in Arizona, a stranger telling me there was a girl standing up in a courtroom saying the same things I'd never dared to say, telling me I wasn't the only one." She looked up, and her eyes found Elena's across the whole length of the room, and something passed between them, some current older than either of them. I wasn't the only one. So I got on a train. The courtroom erupted. It took the judge a full minute to hammer it back into silence. And in that minute, Elena watched Harold Vance understand that he was finished, watch the machine behind his eyes, run the numbers one last time, and come up for the first time in his life with nothing. No angle. No leverage. No note to call, no reputation to trade, on no frightened silence left to hide behind. The thing he'd counted on, absolutely the thing his whole cruel life had been built upon, that his victims would always be alone, always be silent, always believe they were the only one, had failed him. Because Luke had been right. There had always been more of them than there were of him. And the moment one of them stood up in the light, the rest had found they could stand too. Harold Vance was not returned to Hollow Creek. He was returned in the end to his own county in the custody of a marshal to answer for the death of Catherine Vance, a matter that Ruth Ackerman's testimony and a subsequent examination of a grave that should never have been dug so hastily would keep the courts occupied for a long time to come. The note against Luke's ranch, purchased for the express purpose of ruin, was found to have been bought under fraudulent representations, and was voided by the same court that heard the rest of it. He left the county seat in shackles, and he did not look magnificent anymore. He looked like what he had always been underneath the fine coat, which was a small and frightened man who had built his whole life out of other people's fear and had just watched it all collapse the instant they stopped being afraid. He tried at the very last to catch Elena's eye one final time, that wounded, loving look. "You'll come back. You'll come crawling, remember?" Harold offered to take you home. Elena looked at him, and she felt nothing. Not hatred, not triumph, not even fear. She looked at the man who had defined the shape of her fear for 3 years, who had crawled into her every waking moment and every dark hallway, and she found that he had become small, just a man. Just a cruel, frightened, ordinary man, being led away in chains, who had never had any power over her at all, except the power she'd been tricked into handing him. And she took that power back in that courtroom with one steady look, and she gave him nothing in return. And then she turned away from him deliberately, completely. And she never looked at Harold Vance again as long as she lived. The ride back to Hollow Creek was long and quiet and golden. Elena sat beside Luke on the wagon seat, and Martha sat in the back humming something old and content, and no one spoke for a long while, because some things are too big for talk right after. "You know," Luke said finally, "you never did answer the question." "What question?" "The one from the road. First day." He kept his eyes ahead on the horses. "You asked me what the price was, what I wanted from you. And I told you 3 meals a day, sleep through the night, heal your ribs, and someday walk across a room without going tight in the shoulders." He glanced at her. "You did all of those. Every one. I watched you do it these last months, so I guess the bill's paid in full. You don't owe me a thing, Elena. You're square with the house." Elena was quiet a moment. "Then let me ask you a question," she said, "since we're settling accounts." "All right." "That first day you told me you didn't call it love. You said you called it responsibility." She turned to look at him. "Do you still call it that?" Luke Brennan pulled the horses to a stop right there in the middle of the open road, the way he had once before, months ago, a lifetime ago, when he'd stopped to tell her the whole price was that she should someday be able to cross a room while he stood in it. And he turned to face her fully, and for once in his steady life, he looked almost afraid, this man who'd faced down a hired gun without blinking. "No," he said. "I don't call it that anymore." "What do you call it now?" "I call it the thing I was too much of a coward to say out loud back when you were too hurt to hear it." He took a breath. "I love you, Elena. Not because I saved you, and not because you needed saving, and not because you remind me of my mother. You don't. You're nothing like her. You're entirely your own self, and it took me about a week to see that. I love you because you climbed out a window at 4 in the morning with one bag and no plan, which is the bravest thing I ever heard of anybody doing. I love you because you dumped that bag out on the bed and stayed. I love you because I watched you walk into a courtroom full of people who'd come to call you crazy and stand up and win. You're not a woman I rescued. You're the strongest person I've ever known, and I have been in love with you since about the moment you refused to lie to me on that platform, and I have been waiting all this time for you to be safe enough, and whole enough, and free enough to hear me say it and know it was your own free choice to answer or not." His voice was rough. "So there it is. There's the truth of me. And you don't owe me an answer any more than you owed me anything else. You're free, Elena. Free to stay or go, free to answer or not. That's the whole point. That was always the whole point." Elena Carter sat on the wagon seat in the golden afternoon, a free woman on an open road with nothing owed and nothing owing. With a locked door behind her, she controlled, and a whole open country in front of her, she could ride into any direction she chose. She was not trapped. She was not afraid. She was not paying any price, or earning any keep or bracing for any blow. For the first time in her entire life, she was sitting completely and utterly free with every road open and no chains on her at all. And out of all that freedom of her own will, wanting it purely because she wanted it, she chose him. She reached across the wagon seat, and she took his face in her healed hands, and she kissed Luke Brennan freely, gladly, with no fear anywhere in her at all. "I love you too," she said when she could. "And I'm not going anywhere. Not because I have to. Not because I've got nowhere else. Because there is nowhere else on this earth I would rather be than right here beside you in the light. I chose the window. I chose the train. I chose to unpack my bag. And now, with every road in the world open in front of me, and not one soul on earth able to stop me, I choose you." She smiled, and it was a smile with no checking of the room in it, no glance over the shoulder, no fear. That's the difference he never understood, Luke. He took. You never took anything. You just kept the door open and waited to see what I'd choose. And I choose this. I choose you. Every day for the rest of my life, I choose this. They were married 3 weeks later on the ranch under a wide, clear sky, with Martha weeping happily in the front row, and Doc Halloran giving the bride away, and half of Hollow Creek in attendance, the same town that had once whispered about the beaten girl Luke Brennan brought in off the train, now come to celebrate her because she had shown them all what standing up looked like, and more than one woman in that county had found her own voice in the echo of Elena's. And in the years that followed, the ranch at Hollow Creek became known for something beyond its cattle and its fine north pasture. It became known quietly as a place a certain kind of woman could come, a woman stepping off a train alone, holding herself careful, keeping her head down, trying to disappear. Word traveled the way such word does, hand to hand in the dark. If you can get to Hollow Creek, if you can get to the Brennan place, there's a woman there who understands. There's a locked door with the bolt on the inside. There's a bowl of soup, and nobody asks you to earn it. There's an old woman named Martha who'll sit with you while you cry and never tell you to stop. And there's a man who will stand in front of anything that comes for you and never once ask you to pay him back. Elena Carter had stepped off a train, broken, silent, and afraid, with everything she owned in a single bag and nowhere left in the world to run. She had come west believing that the best she could hope for was a cage with an unfamiliar shape. And she had found instead the one thing she had never once in her life dared to hope for: not a rescuer, not an owner, not even a husband, but a free open door and the right to walk through it in whichever direction she chose. She spent the rest of her life walking back through that door every single day, freely, gladly, because she wanted to. And no one, not ever again, as long as she lived, laid a hand on Elena Brennan, except in love.